The Chicago Bulls lost a game to the Los Angeles Clippers last night. We're going to break down that game a little bit, but we're also going to talk about what are the biggest questions and changes that could come this season, depending on how the front office evaluates the roster this offseason. We're going to talk about all that plus more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today. So, as we all know by now, the Chicago Bulls lost a game at home to the Los Angeles Clippers, and this was a game where the Bulls were really just outmanned and outgunned, right? That's what it comes down to. The Bulls did, despite, what the final score of losing by 15 will tell you, showed a lot of heart in this game. Getting the lead down to single digits in the fourth quarter at one point did the Chicago Bulls, but they just did not have enough firepower to match what Paul George and Kawhi Leonard would bring him. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George go 11 of 12 from the field for Paul George, 12 of 17 for Kawhi Leonard. They combine to go 8 of 12 from three-point range, and they just were rocking and rolling. And unfortunately, the Bulls just did not have enough to kind of kick it into that second gear to push it and to try and be in a place to win this game. It's unfortunate. When they did get the lead down to single digits, it did feel like, hey, maybe this was going to happen, but the Bulls just ran out of gas is really just what it came to. The second of a back-to-back, you were missing Julian Phillips, you were missing Kobe White in this game, and unfortunately, that's just what happens. That's the way that the cookie crumbles. But you got to give it up for the performance, like I said, of Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, 28 and 27 points respectively. Norman Powell again killing the Bulls off the bench. He goes 6 of 10 from the field for 18 points. Bones Highland with 17 points as well in that starting lineup. So, the Bulls just didn't have enough. Now, for the performance, a lot of the Bulls players gave it all out on the court, right? DeMar DeRozan goes 6 of 16 from the field, unfortunately. Not the most efficient night for him, especially after, how he pushed us to that overtime victory at 46 points. But he had 21 points in this game. Then you got Nikola Vucevic with 19 points on 8 of 14 shooting. He chips in 6 rebounds, 5 assists in this game. Alex Caruso with 17 points as well. Cold night from Ayo Dosunmu, goes 2 of 11 from the field. But this is one of those games where Torrey Craig and Jevon Carter, you guys know I don't usually give Jevon Carter a lot of props, both gave the Chicago Bulls everything that they were brought to this team to bring, at least in this one game for Jevon Carter. But Torrey Craig goes 4 of 8 from the field, all 4 of those shots coming from three-point range. He was actually 4 of 7 from three-point range, 6 rebounds, 1 assist, in line for his 12 points. And then you look at Jevon Carter having one of his better games, 5 of 7 from the field in his 17 minutes, 12 points scored in that time. I think he had the highest plus-minus of any Bull on this team again. So, he played solidly as well. Andre Drummond had 15 points. He only missed 1 shot, going 7 of 8 and 7 rebounds. But like I said, the Bulls just did not have enough. They didn't shoot the ball terribly from 3. They go 16 of 35. The Clippers go 20 of 40 from the field for 50%. They also shoot the ball 48 of 80 for 60% from the field overall. That's just, the Bulls just didn't have enough to overcome what the Los Angeles Clippers and how they were playing last night. And it's unfortunate. It sucks to see. Like I said, I would love for the Bulls, and all these wins are important, especially when you look at kind of how the standings in the Eastern Conference are working out. But the Bulls just didn't have enough last night. That's just what it comes down to. And unfortunately, when you're a team that is missing as many players that the Bulls are missing, Patrick Williams, Kobe White, Zach LaVine, all slated to be big parts of the Chicago Bulls team when we came into the season. And Kobe, with the story that he's had and the growth that he's had as well this season, it's just been so important. So, I'm glad that, the Bulls missed, him having a major injury. So he's only going to theoretically miss this game. We'll see if they activate him for Saturday's game. But, a loss to the Clippers, again, it sucks, right? Especially when you lose to them for the second time within basically a week. It sucks. But, it is what it is, man. The Bulls, they fought hard throughout this game, and they just came up short. And that you could feel that, right? Once this game started and Kawhi and Paul George got into the rhythm that they got into, it was always going to be a difficult one for the Bulls to kind of get a grip of that. And for their credit, they got a better grip of it than what I thought. And Billy Donovan coached a pretty damn good game today. He did go to the double big lineup again today. It had kind of the same effects that it always had. We get more rebounds over that time and stuff like that, but it's never really been that thing that just works out hugely for the Bulls. In the 6 minutes and 30 seconds that we played Vooch and Drummond together, they had a plus minus of -2 and a negative net rating of -18. Now, they had a really good stretch in that first stretch they were out there. Specifically, it was Vooch, Drummond, Caruso, and Javon Carter with DeMar DeRozan. That unit had a net rating of 50 and a positive plus minus of +4. But then when you flip that same lineup, but you put Ayo Dosunmu out there instead of Javon Carter, that was for 3 minutes and 45 seconds. That was the -6 and -64 net rating. So, it just kind of works out that way, unfortunately, when it comes down to it. But, Billy Donovan did try to do something different, which I got to give him credit for. He noticed, how the Bulls were getting killed on the boards and things like that. Try to go to a different lineup and a different looking. For the credit, the Bulls end up winning the rebounding battle by 1 rebound for whatever that's worth. But this is just one of those losses that suck, right? And you understood why the Bulls lost this game, and you're just going to come up short. And the Clippers are a team that are a legit championship contending team when they're all healthy and playing the way that we've seen them play at times this season. So, that's what it comes down to. The Bulls got a lot of work to do. Luckily, they get a day off. Over that day, they're hoping Kobe White's going to get, completely over that mild hip sprain so he can get back on the court Saturday for the Bulls. But I'll tell you what, Torrey Craig, now clearly off that minutes restriction, played great for the Bulls. And maybe Billy Donovan looks to pushing him back into the starting lineup, putting some of that firepower in either Ayo Dosunmu or Alex Caruso back on the bench. I would kind of go Caruso in that sense because, to me, Dosunmu's played so great with Kobe White and their skill sets overlap so well. But that's something to look out for going forward into the future. But to look at the standings, I try to do a standings watch now that we're leading towards the end of the season every day. The Bulls still hold a 2-game advantage over the Atlanta Hawks right now. We had a 2.5-game advantage coming into this game. The Hawks, I think, do play tonight, so we'll see if the Hawks can win to get another half game on the Chicago Bulls. If they do, they face the Utah Jazz, so that should be an interesting matchup. So while the Bulls don't play tonight, if you want to see an interesting matchup that could have implication on the Bulls, you got the Atlanta Hawks versus the Utah Jazz, of course, which could impact some things. The Miami Heat versus the Detroit Pistons, with the Miami Heat being right above the Chicago Bulls at that 8 seed as well. They have a 4-game advantage over the Bulls. But now the Bulls move into 15 games left on the season for the Bulls. And keep in mind, they go into what is one of their easier stretches of the season. We've played against all playoff or play-in teams here over our last handful of games, besides, I think, 1 game. So this is where the Bulls can get into it easy. The Bulls now have I believe, let's take a look. I believe it's the 12th easiest schedule remaining in the NBA now. So you want to take a look at that. And so, we actually know, I'm sorry. We have the 2nd easiest schedule in the NBA for the remaining part of the way. So this is a time period where the Bulls can really make some move. When you look at the Bulls schedule remaining for the season, tough matchups, right? We got 1 game left against the Boston Celtics. We got 1 game left against the Minnesota Timberwolves, 3 games left against the New York Knicks, 1 game against the Magic, 1 game against the Pacers left. Now, with that said as well, we got 3 games left against the Washington Wizards, 1 game against the Detroit Pistons, 1 game against the Portland Trail Blazers, 1 game against the Brooklyn Nets, a game against the Hawks, which could be important to create that separation, and 1 game against the Rockets as well. So the Bulls have a much easier schedule here for the remaining part of the season. They just got to keep holding on because the Atlanta Hawks are right there nipping on our heels. And the Bulls can take advantage of this easier schedule, part of their schedule that they're going into. A play-in is all but likely for the Chicago Bulls. Now, I've talked about it before. The Bulls are likely to make a play-in. They still hold a higher % chance of making the play-in than missing it. And that's fine, right? That's fine to make it into the play-in. But the Bulls have to come in and play hard. And if they do make it out that play-in tournament to make it interesting, we'll see what the Bulls can do in the playoffs or in that first-round series, because that first-round series is going to be a motherfucker, right? But we got our next 3 games against Washington, Portland, and Houston. Now, that Houston matchup, we'll see who plays with them. Sengun's got hurt and things like that. But those are all games that are very winnable games for the Bulls. But as we've talked about before, the Bulls cannot go into any game lacking. You can't go into any game expecting a win or a victory because, as we've seen with the Bulls, they can lose against anybody at the same time, right? But then after that, we got Boston, and then we go back to a game against Washington. We got Indiana, and then Brooklyn and Minnesota. So we'll see how the Bulls can fare over this time period, man. Going to be an interesting matchup, especially, like I said, some of those matchups that we have. But the Bulls just got to keep maintaining, focus on business. Hopefully we can avoid anybody else going down, right? You don't want to be put in a situation where you continually lose players. And so, hey, I'm excited for the next 15 games and the end of the season, right? To see how the Bulls really fare, continue looking at that measuring stick, continue playing the younger players as well, which Billy Donovan has been doing a lot more here recently, to see how this team is going to continue to perform, which one of these players are going to show up for the Chicago Bulls as we head toward the end of the season, and a front office that has to make some difficult decisions possibly. Now, in those difficult decisions, we got to look at possible changes I want to look at some possible changes for the Bulls this offseason. And the first one, of course, as far as that would bring a considerable change to the team, is moving on from Zach LaVine, right? Now, it came out from Casey Johnson's recent article. The Bulls are still planning on revisiting Zach LaVine trades this offseason. It also came out in that same article that Zach, didn't necessarily request a trade, but he's open to one. So what does it mean for that, right? When you look at it right now, and this is where the Bulls are going to have to evaluate as well as teams around the league, the Bulls have been better without Zach LaVine. I know that's something that a lot of, Bulls fans have kind of fought against, and looking at win-loss, we average almost 5 extra points per possession without Zach LaVine on the court. Now, with that said, Zach LaVine and everybody got off to an extremely slow start of the season, right? And just like DeMar worked himself out of it, right? Just like Vooch worked himself out of it for a month or so there, right? There's reason to believe that Zach would have worked himself out of it as well. That shooting slump that Zach LaVine was on, where he was shooting the worst true shooting percentage of his career, wouldn't have necessarily kept on, right? And then also Zach LaVine did, when he came back, showed an ability to kind of fit in. Now, I know that we looked at that, and everybody kind of looked at it and said, well, is he just doing that to kind of facilitate the trade, right? Because he was playing better defense. He was passing more to his teammates, right? He was deferring some more. So there is, on the flip side, reason to think that Zach LaVine could have turned this season around, just like a lot of the Bulls did, right? But when teams around the league that could be the ones trading for you are already questioning how much do you impact winning, that is something that hurts the trade market. But the Bulls have to look at that and review it and ask themselves, all right, is this something that we want to avoid the conversation around Zach LaVine, and let's just do what we need to do to focus on basketball? But that's going to be one of the biggest questions. I was originally in the thought process that the Bulls were not going to move Zach LaVine this offseason, and I thought it may have to get pushed more towards the trade deadline next year. But hearing that the Bulls are going to plan on revisiting trades, that is a huge domino that could fall for the Bulls. Now, let me dispel some narratives around that, right? I've seen people say, well, you move on from Zach, you do a salary dump, and then you're able to keep DeMar, you're able to keep Andre Drummond. You don't salary dump $40 million in salary. That's not going to happen. You're going to be bringing some salary back. Now, as I pointed out before, you can take advantage of teams having cap space, because it's the offseason where they can absorb a portion of Zach LaVine's contract to where you're not taking back that $40 million exactly, which could leave you a little room for your contracts. For example, if a team has $12 million, let's say $12 to $15 million in cap space, right? And so they're absorbing the rest of Zach LaVine's contract minus that $15 million. That creates a surplus for the Chicago Bulls that they could use that $12 to $15 million to be what Patrick Williams' extension is, right? So that type of thing can happen, and I'm sure AK and Eversley are going to be reviewing all of that. But also, you have to also take notice that it could definitely be a opportunity, or it could be an outcome that the Bulls just don't get a good trade back for Zach. Now, that's up to the front office to weigh the risk versus reward of that. If you move Zach LaVine and you are getting back only some minuscule pieces, but you're just doing it to move off of him, maybe you're getting some heavily protected picks or whatever it is, that's something that the front office has to weigh, and if that's worth the risk of trading Zach LaVine. But moving Zach is probably going to be one of the first big dominoes outside of the draft pick and where we fall in that draft, where the Bulls are going to have to make a tough decision about the future of this team. And that may directly affect the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is what's the future of DeMar DeRozan on this team? We've seen it, and I've said it. I had a video last week with it was titled "DeMar DeRozan's play has earned him a contract extension." That doesn't mean he's necessarily destined to get one. But for the credit, DeMar DeRozan was quoted as saying this: "It's kind of like with your spouse. It's a relationship. It's like, what do you need to do to work on? What do we need to do to work on this, baby? Let's figure this thing out. You want me, I want you. The love is here. The love is there." So that is what DeMar DeRozan said back in February when he was asked about a contract extension with the Chicago Bulls. Now, when you add to that things that we've heard from Casey Johnson and others, is that the Bulls were far apart on both money and years on a DeMar DeRozan extension. Now, here's the thing that I'm going to paint. if the first domino falls and that you move on from Zach LaVine, I do think that it makes it more likely that you look to keep DeMar DeRozan for whatever it's worth. I know there are going to be people who love that, people who hate that, right? I do think that the Bulls could look to do that to keep a veteran presence on this team on top of the other veteran presences that we have here. But I still don't think that that's going to be where they're just willing to pay DeMar DeRozan anything. I still think that this team is going to be looking at their cap situation going forward and try to kind of work that to where they can make some bigger moves if they need to in subsequent off seasons. I do think that if you keep DeMar, if you re-sign Patrick Williams, the huge amount of change is not coming to this team. That may pivot you to where you keep a lot of your pieces, but then you're maximizing and trying to play more and benefit more from playing Batum, right? Playing Julian Phillips, having Dalen Terry as part of your rotation, and that could be a transitional year as far as that. Or you can look to add some more veterans, the level of a Torrey Craig, the level of a Javon, the level that we thought a Javon Carter would play for this team. So those are some options for the Bulls as well. But that next big domino is to decide what you're going to do with DeMar. Now, I would have put Patrick Williams on this list, but I do think that this team is going to retain Patrick Williams. I don't really think there's too much of a question that this front office that's still extremely high on Patrick Williams is going to move on from him while he's 22 years old. The biggest thing is getting him on the proper contract of what they think that value is. So Patrick Williams is still a domino that needs to be decided on this offseason, but I think that's kind of a foregone conclusion with that said. So DeMar is another one at that, and we'll see what if DeMar gets that. Like I said, the question about it isn't necessarily DeMar's play on the court. His fit may be a problem, and in the skill set that you want there to support your younger players, but his play is not the biggest question there. We know defensive liability. He's always been that, though. And then the next bigger question that this Chicago Bulls front office has to ask this offseason is that what does the growth of the younger players mean? The fact that you've seen growth and development from Ayo and from Kobe leaps from those guys. And then you've seen smaller development from Batum. You've seen smaller development from Julian Phillips. You've seen smaller development from Dalen Terry, right? You've seen some flashes that you initially drafted those guys for. I'm talking about the latter two, not Batum. But you've seen the flashes that you drafted those guys for, and you have to ask yourself, how much do you want to prioritize these players in what you do this offseason, right? A youth movement could very well come in Chicago. Now, by that youth movement, I don't mean that you jettison all the veterans off. Not saying that at all. But I mean a youth movement in the sense that you see these younger players play a much larger role than what they started off this season with and even what they may finish this season with. And that's part of the evaluation period that AK has to do, paired with the player development department as well, on what they truly think they can get and develop out of these players over the next year or so and the next offseason. So that's going to be a big part of that evaluation and a big part of the offseason as well for the Bulls. So those are things that this Bulls team, this front office is asking themselves and is going to have to evaluate with the remaining 15 games of the season. You really, truly want to see on the team. Can he be that shooter for us that we need off the bench? How much more shooting do we have to add? Do we need to add one? Do we need to add two shooters, right? Julian Phillips, what is the ceiling for him? Can him and Patrick Williams man that power forward position? And how much can Julian Phillips play both the position out on the wing and the power forward, right? Those are questions that have to be asked and answered, as well as some in the G League. Adama Sanogo is killing it in the G League. He is playing at a level where it's going to be hard to kind of excuse keeping him in the G League if you truly are invested in his development, not because he's going to do that exactly one for one at the NBA level, but because he's showing an ability that he's head and shoulders above the competition in the G League. You're not developing any more skill out of him theoretically with him playing another season in the G League. So does he play a role for you? You need some size. You need some shot blocking. You need some rebounding. He brings all of those things. And if he is a player that you think that you can look at and say, hey, he may be able to bring those things that we want, then you don't necessarily have to go out and add the shot block. I think they're still going to look for a big in this year's draft, which then you'll be pairing that as well. But that's some things that this front office also has to look at this offseason. It's going to be a fun offseason, and it's going to be one that we are going to cover at an extremely high level. It's going to be fun, right? You guys know, offseason coverage, the one thing that I can say, I don't think anybody does offseason coverage for the Chicago Bulls like I do. Nobody. You're going to get in-depth draft analysis. You're going to get in-depth free agent analysis. You're going to get all of that and the breaking news as everything drops. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. And, we'll see what this front office ends up doing, but these last 15 games for the Bulls are important for more than just whether we make the play-in, whether we make it to 500. It's going to be important to setting the tone of what this team is going to be really looking to do in this offseason. So I want to hear from you guys, right? Either if you send it in the mailbag, I would love to hear you guys in the voicemail from this. You can also leave a comment. If you don't feel like leaving a voicemail, you can also type mailbag in the front of your comment. I'll know that you want to leave that for the mailbag if you leave that on the YouTube side. But I want to hear from you guys on this. When you look at everything in front of the Chicago Bulls, I want to hear from you. What players do you think return next year? What players do you think are gone and are not on this roster by the start of next offseason? Let me know what you guys think on all that. Make sure you're following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.